You've talked to me a lot about your thoughts about this, and I've been really inspired. But it gets back to me, to your conviction in this issue and your determination to go down at a time when our nation needs this, to go down as one of the great leaders when it comes to dealing with the daily unconscionable injustices faced by some Americans and not others at the hands of law enforcement. And I think that one thing you said to me privately particularly motivated me to believe you when you talk about your aspirations. And I'm wondering if you could just conclude by answering me the question about your motivation and maybe some of your own family history in confronting hate and discrimination in American history.
Yes, Senator. So, I come from a family where my grandparents fled anti-Semitism and persecution. The country took us in and protected us. And I feel an obligation to the country to pay back. And this is the highest, best use of my own set of skills to pay back. And so I want very much to be the kind of attorney general that you're saying I could become. And I'll do my best to try to be that kind of attorney general.
I believe your heart, and I'm grateful that you are living that Micah mandate.
That we could have had someone like Merrick Garland and instead got someone like Bill Barr goes to show just how misguided this country was during the last administration. Finally, after being robbed of a confirmation hearing when he was nominated to the Supreme Court by Barack Obama, and after being stalled by Republicans when Mitch McConnell dragged his feet on an organizing resolution to hand committee gavels to Democrats, finally Merrick Garland is getting the hearing he deserves, now for the role as Attorney General. Garland's position on racial justice flies in the face of that of his predecessor. Remember, Bill Barr viewed the racial justice protests across the country not as a catalyst to investigate the legitimate issue of police brutality, but to vilify the victims of police brutality. He called Black Lives Matter a revolutionary group that is interested in some form of socialism, communism. They're essentially Bolsheviks, and said the left was intent on, quote, tearing down the system, and called their tactics fascistic. The left. Bill Barr was in Donald Trump's cabinet, the guy who tried to anoint himself the president after losing an election, and the left is tearing down the system? Bill Barr himself once ordered peaceful protesters cleared from outside of St. John's Episcopal Church so that Trump could hold up a Bible for a photo op, and the left is fascistic? In case you needed any more examples of the right trafficking and projection. Barr even claimed that Black Lives Matter is an anti-government operation co-opted by Antifa, because remember, it's extra points if you can find a way to blame Antifa for something. He said, quote, the left wants power because that is essentially their state of grace in their secular religion. They want to run people's lives so they can design utopia for all of us, and that's what turns them on. And it's the lust for power, and they weren't expecting Trump's victory, and it outrages them. Again, for Bill Barr in Donald Trump's administration to criticize anyone for lusting for power would be laughable if it wasn't so dangerous. But with Merrick Garland, whose own family history includes fleeing anti-Semitism and persecution, you won't have an attorney general weaponizing the Justice Department to perpetuate injustice. Instead, Garland has vowed to prosecute those who've committed those crimes. And that includes, first and foremost, putting an end to this idea that Antifa is responsible for anything and everything, including, by the way, an attack on the Capitol where those in attendance were literally wearing MAGA hats, MAGA shirts, waving Trump flags, and even identified as avowed Trump supporters. Senator Josh Hawley even tried to draw this false equivalency between Portland and the Trump-inspired insurrection during his questioning, which Garland duly shut down.
Let me ask you about assaults on federal property in places other than Washington, D.C., Portland, for instance, Seattle. Do you regard assaults on federal courthouses or other federal property as acts of domestic extremism, domestic terrorism?
Well, Senator, my own definition, which is about the same as the statutory definition, is the use of violence or threats of violence in an attempt to disrupt democratic processes. So an attack on a courthouse while in operation, trying to prevent judges from actually deciding cases that plainly is domestic extremism, domestic terrorism. An attack simply on government property at night or any other kind of circumstances is a clear crime and a serious one and should be punished. I don't know enough about the facts of the example you're talking about, but that's where I draw the line. One is both are criminal, but one is a core attack on our democratic institutions.
So I get that Republicans want to be able to point to Antifa and Portland as some catch-all for their relentless whataboutisms, but it doesn't seem like they have a captive audience in Merrick Garland. He's even vowed to prosecute white supremacists, among others, who stormed the Capitol on January 6th.
From 1995 to 1997, I supervised the prosecution of the perpetrators of the bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building, who sought to spark a revolution that would topple the federal government. If confirmed, I will supervise the prosecution of white supremacists and others who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, a heinous attack that sought to disrupt a cornerstone of our democracy.
And it's not just about seeking justice for those who commit crimes in the name of white supremacy. He'll also focus on righting the wrongs of a justice system steeped in implicit bias, including in marijuana cases, which hopefully bodes well for those of us who are hoping to see marijuana get moved away from its classification as a Schedule I drug, a break from this country's long history, on both sides of the aisle, of institutionalized racism in the name of justice.
Marijuana example is a perfect example that you've given here. Here's a nonviolent crime that, with respect to usage, that does not require us to incarcerate people. And we're incarcerating at different rates, significantly different rates of the different communities. And that is wrong, and it's the kind of problem that will then follow a person for the rest of their lives. It will make it impossible to get a job. It will lead to a downward economic spiral for their family.
Right.
So there are many things that the Justice Department has to do in this regard, and I completely agree that disparate results with respect to wealth accumulation, discrimination in employment, discrimination in housing, discrimination in health care availability, all of which we all see now in the consequences of a pandemic, which affects communities of color enormously more with respect to infection rates, with respect to hospitalization, and ultimately to death. So one set of things we can do is the mass incarceration example that I began with. We can focus our attention on violent crimes and other crimes that put great danger in our society and not allocate our resources to something like marijuana possession. We can look at our charging policies and go and stop charging the highest possible offense with the highest possible sentence.
The fact is that Garland will be an attorney general not focused on protecting the president, but protecting the law. Time will tell whether he holds true to these assurances, but the assurances themselves will signal a welcome change at the Justice Department. While you're here, please check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. I take a deep dive into the top stories of the week, and I also interview major players in the world of politics, like Kamala Harris, Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, Pete Buttigieg, Katie Porter, Al Franken, Cory Booker, Jamie Harrison, Mary Trump, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.